In 1220, travelers making their way along the ancient trade routes of Central Asia stumbled upon something they couldn't explain. Where once stood the glorious city of Merv, renowned for its libraries, its vibrant bazaars, its culture, there was now only scorched earth and suffocating silence. The bones of a once proud civilization lay sun-bleached under a merciless sun, a silent memorial to a single catastrophic act of arrogance. Not long ago, the Khwarezmian Empire had been a giant, its borders stretching from the Caspian Sea to the edges of India, commanding the most valuable trade routes in the world. Its rulers fancied themselves as heirs of Alexander the Great, lords of an empire nearly 10 million strong. But within 3 short years, that empire would vanish so utterly, so completely, that future generations would struggle to believe it had ever existed at all. This is the story of how a single insult, one moment of hubris dressed as diplomacy, triggered one of the most deliberate acts of devastation in human history. It began with a trade caravan. It ended with the death of a civilization. And at the center of it all stood Genghis Khan, whose response redefined the very nature of total war. A world on the brink. The year was 1218. At the time, the world still seemed big enough for multiple empires to coexist. Goods, ideas, and cultures flowed like rivers between East and West. Silk, spices, mathematics, philosophies. Trade was booming, and borders felt less like barriers and more like meeting points. To many in the civilized world, the Mongol Empire seemed like a distant concern, just another nomadic tribe from beyond the mountains. Exotic, perhaps, but not serious, not threatening. Certainly not a rival to established empires like the Khwarezmians. But civilizations are more fragile than they seem. Their downfall doesn't always come from decades of decay. Sometimes, all it takes is one fatal misjudgment. Sometimes, the danger isn't the barbarian pounding at the gates. It's the force that chooses, with absolute clarity, to destroy instead of spare. At the crossroads of history, the Khwarezmian Empire was not just a kingdom. It was the crown jewel of Islamic civilization in Central Asia. It stretched across what today is Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, parts of Afghanistan, and Kazakhstan. The empire was rich, sophisticated, and immensely powerful. At the helm was Sultan Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, who ruled from 1200 to 1220. His dominion encompassed some of the world's greatest cities: Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench. His people controlled the legendary Silk Road, turning the empire into an economic powerhouse. Gold, gems, ivory, and silk poured into their cities. Their military was no less formidable. Hundreds of thousands of elite troops, armored cavalry, skilled archers, siege engineers, formed a seemingly unbreakable force. Their cities were wrapped in walls so thick and tall, they'd repelled sieges for decades. They had conquered neighboring kingdoms with what seemed like ease. Culturally, they stood at the pinnacle of intellectual life. Their libraries brimmed with manuscripts on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and more. Scholars from across the Islamic world made pilgrimages to study there. Artists, poets, and philosophers made their courts glow with prestige. The Khwarezmians truly believed themselves to be the rightful heirs of the great Persian empires. And in their eyes, the Mongols were little more than uncultured horsemen, brutal nomads with no cities, no libraries, no legacy. That contempt would be their downfall. The mistake that lit the fuse. From a geopolitical standpoint, the Khwarezmians believed they held all the cards. They had recently defeated the Kara-Khitai and absorbed their lands, becoming direct neighbors to the rising Mongol power in the east. But rather than seeing this new proximity as a reason for caution, Sultan Muhammad saw it as an opportunity. The Mongols, he thought, might make good trading partners, or perhaps even obedient vassals. His arrogance reached its peak when he openly challenged the spiritual authority of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, declaring himself a divinely chosen ruler. He styled himself the Second Alexander, believing it was his destiny to rule all the known world. And that overconfidence, so blinding, so unshakable, was the beginning of the end. In the spring of 1218, a trade caravan approached the border city of Otrar. This was no ordinary group of merchants. It was a carefully assembled diplomatic mission, sanctioned by Genghis Khan himself. Around 450 men, mostly Muslim traders but also Mongol representatives and possibly intelligence officers, traveled with gold, silk, jade, furs, and ivory, a fortune in cargo. But more than that, it was a message. The Mongols came in peace, seeking partnership through commerce. Genghis Khan had intentionally chosen Muslim merchants to lead the expedition, knowing that religious familiarity would smooth relations. Everything about the caravan said diplomacy, but the governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, uncle to the Sultan, saw things differently. Otrar was a vital border post, and Inalchuk was known for both paranoia and greed. He accused the caravan of being spies. Whether this was true or not remains a mystery, but what followed was unmistakably criminal. With the Sultan's approval, Inalchuk ordered the arrest of the entire caravan. All 450 men were put to death, their bodies dumped outside the city like trash, their cargo seized and divided among the governor's followers. Only one man escaped, a camel driver who raced back to the Mongol court with news of the massacre. The response that changed everything. This wasn't just a diplomatic breach. In the customs of the day, merchants, especially those sent under royal seal, were considered untouchable, sacred even. To kill an envoy was to kill the very idea of peaceful diplomacy, and to kill them all, that was a declaration of absolute uncompromising war. But the Khwarezmians had no idea what they had just done. When word of the massacre reached Genghis Khan at his capital in Karakorum, he didn't react with immediate rage. According to the Persian historian Juvaini, he climbed a hill and sat alone for 3 days and nights, contemplating his course of action. When he came down, his decision was made. The Khwarezmian Empire would be erased. But first, Genghis Khan tried diplomacy, one final time. He sent 3 ambassadors to Sultan Muhammad, 1 Muslim and 2 Mongol envoys. Their message was direct: return the stolen goods, hand over Governor Inalchuk, and take responsibility. Do that, and the matter would be closed. The Sultan's response? He had the Muslim envoy beheaded. And the Mongols? He had their beards shaved off, a gesture of extreme humiliation in Mongol culture. When the 2 mutilated envoys returned to the Mongol court, the entire leadership was stunned. Some wept with fury. Others demanded vengeance on the spot. Genghis Khan stood and simply said, "The Sultan has chosen war. Let him have war." This was no longer a political dispute. It was a matter of honor. And the Mongol code offered only 2 options: total submission or total annihilation. The Sultan had chosen annihilation. As 1221 dawned, the Khwarezmian Empire stood proud, still unaware that it had just sealed its doom. From its bustling cities to its confident armies, few imagined that they were about to face a force unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. Genghis Khan was already preparing. He summoned an army estimated between 100,000 to 150,000 warriors. But these weren't just horsemen swinging swords. These were the results of years of innovation, military discipline, and ruthless trial by fire. Each soldier had multiple horses, allowing them to travel with terrifying speed and stamina. They carried their own supplies, lived off the land, and never waited for supply wagons. But what truly set them apart was what they brought with them. Chinese siege engineers, advanced catapults, and even early gunpowder weapons. The Mongols weren't just mobile, they were adaptable. They could lay siege to the strongest cities with surgical precision. And now, they were coming for Otrar. Justice at Otrar. The city that had ignited the fury of Genghis Khan was the first target. Otrar stood tall behind its walls, its defenders confident they could withstand any siege. Inalchuk, the governor who had ordered the massacre of the Mongol caravan, was in command. Genghis Khan personally led the assault. But this was no ordinary siege. From the outset, the Mongols unleashed not just force, but terror. They spread disinformation, using spies and defectors to confuse the defenders. They captured locals and used them as human shields, and slowly, methodically, they tightened their grip. For 5 brutal months, Otrar held out. But resistance only delayed the inevitable. When the city finally fell, its end was swift and brutal. Inalchuk was captured alive. According to chroniclers, his punishment was symbolic. Molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a grisly sentence for a man driven by greed. The rest of the population, an estimated 100,000, was slaughtered. The city was leveled. Nothing remained. And that, as terrifying as it was only the beginning. The fires spread. Bukhara. As the ashes of Otrar settled, Mongol forces were already advancing toward the heart of the Khwarezmian realm. Their next destination, Bukhara, one of the crown jewels of Islamic civilization. For centuries, Bukhara had been a center of learning, trade, and culture. Its libraries held treasures of knowledge. Its markets drew merchants from across the known world. The Khwarezmians had fortified it well. Their armies were stationed along the expected invasion routes. But Genghis Khan didn't take the expected route. Instead, he led his forces across the near-impassable Kizilkum Desert, a maneuver so audacious that it stunned the defenders. To them, it must have felt like the Mongols had materialized from thin air. Panic spread quickly. The garrison, mostly Turkish troops, tried a breakout early in the siege. The Mongols feigned retreat, lured them out, and then annihilated them in open battle. With its defenders destroyed, Bukhara was left exposed. The city's leaders opened the gates, hoping to negotiate. They expected tribute, a change in leadership, maybe the execution of a few officials. What they got was Mongol justice. Genghis Khan's message. According to historical accounts, Genghis Khan entered Bukhara personally and addressed its citizens. His speech was cold, direct, and unforgettable. He declared that their sultan had committed crimes against the Mongol people. And now, they would all pay the price for his arrogance. The city's soldiers were executed, every last one. Civilians were divided. Artisans and craftsmen were spared, to be enslaved and taken east. Young men were forced into the Mongol army. The rest, men, women, and children, were killed or sold into slavery. The destruction of Bukhara was methodical. The Mongols looted its treasures, burned its libraries, and turned its great mosque into a stable for horses. Scholars were burned alive with their books. Families were ripped apart. Buildings, centuries old, were reduced to rubble. This wasn't the chaos of war. It was planned, calculated, surgical. The Mongols destroyed what they didn't need and preserved only what was useful. When they moved on, Bukhara was a ghost, its legacy shattered in days. The jewel of the empire, Samarkand. If Bukhara was a prize, then Samarkand was the crown. A majestic city with breathtaking architecture, wealth beyond measure, and cultural prestige unmatched in Central Asia. Samarkand was not only a political capital, it was the spiritual heart of the Khwarezmian Empire. And now, it was next. The city was defended by what was believed to be 50,000 men, though modern historians suspect that number is inflated. Still, its defenses were formidable. It didn't matter. Genghis Khan had already gathered detailed intelligence from prisoners and informants. He knew which gates were weakest. He knew who among the local leaders could be bribed, and he used that information like a blade. The siege began, and within 5 days, it ended. Samarkand's defenders tried the same breakout maneuver that had doomed Bukhara, and the Mongols played the same trick: feigned retreat, then slaughter. Sultan Muhammad II tried twice to send relief armies, but the Mongols repelled them both. Each failed attempt sent a clear message across the empire. The Sultan was powerless. Even his capital was beyond his reach. On the 5th day, Samarkand surrendered. But Genghis Khan had evolved. His tactics were now even more ruthless. Despite the surrender, he ordered the execution of every soldier who had raised a weapon against him. The idea was simple. Surrender meant nothing if you had ever dared resist. Civilians were sorted. Artisans to Mongolia. Young men to war. Everyone else, death or exile. The city's treasures were carted away, its architecture torn down, its families destroyed. But what truly terrified the rest of the empire wasn't just the violence, it was the speed. One of the greatest cities in the world had fallen in less than a week. No one was safe. No city untouchable. The empire crumbles. Sultan Muhammad II, who had once called himself the Second Alexander, now fled. His armies were shattered, his cities destroyed, his people dying by the thousands. He ran west with a handful of loyal guards, abandoning his empire. But Genghis Khan wasn't finished. He dispatched 2 of his top generals, Subutai and Jebe, with 20,000 elite troops. Their mission? Hunt down the Sultan and erase him from the earth. What followed was one of the most incredible military pursuits in history. Over thousands of miles, across mountains, deserts, and rivers, the Mongol generals chased their prey. Wherever they passed, they delivered a chilling message: cooperate or suffer the fate of Samarkand and Bukhara. Villages opened their gates. Cities betrayed their governors. The Sultan had become a ghost, and his empire a carcass picked clean. By December 1220, Muhammad II had reached a small island in the Caspian Sea. Sick, delirious, and consumed by regret, he died, likely from pneumonia, though some say it was heartbreak. The man who had defied Genghis Khan died nameless, exiled, and alone. But the Mongols were just getting started. With Sultan Muhammad II dead, the Khwarezmian Empire no longer had a central command. There was no leader, no vision, no hope. What remained were isolated cities, some still clinging to dreams of resistance, others naively hoping the worst had passed. But Genghis Khan's campaign was far from over. The objective was no longer conquest. It was eradication. The wrath of the Mongols. In the aftermath of Muhammad's death, Mongol forces fanned out across what was left of the empire. Their mission was clear: eliminate every remaining stronghold, make an example of every city that dared to resist. some cities chose to surrender immediately. Merv, Nishapur, Herat, and Urgench opened their gates, hoping that cooperation would spare them. But this time, there would be no mercy. In February of 1221, the city of Merv, known as the Pearl of the World, surrendered without a fight. Its citizens believed submission would save them. It didn't. Mongol troops entered the city in waves. Once inside, they began what can only be described as an industrialized massacre. Persian chroniclers would later claim that over 1 million people were killed. That number is likely inflated, but what matters is the method: cold, systematic slaughter. Each Mongol soldier was assigned a quota, 300, sometimes 400 civilians to kill. The butchery stretched on for days. By the time it was over, the streets ran red. There were no exceptions, no safe houses, no sacred spaces. Merv was wiped off the map. Vengeance at Nishapur, the destruction of Nishapur, was even more chilling. During the siege, a Mongol prince, Genghis Khan's son-in-law, was killed by an arrow fired from within the city. The death enraged the Khan's daughter, the prince's widow. She demanded vengeance, and vengeance she received. After the city surrendered, she personally ordered the execution of every living being, not just men and women, not just children, but animals too. Contemporary accounts describe separate pyramids of skulls, one for men, one for women, one for children. Even cats and dogs were slaughtered. Nishapur, once the birthplace of the poet Omar Khayyam, was turned into a wasteland of bones. The last stand at Urgench. The final major stronghold of the Khwarezmian Empire was Urgench, a city of wealth, trade, and stubborn defiance. Positioned along the Amu Darya River, it was well defended and naturally protected by water. It also held deep symbolic importance. To destroy Urgench would be to erase the last flicker of Khwarezmian power. The siege lasted 6 months. It was one of the few times the Mongols were truly challenged. The defenders fought with desperation, knowing that surrender would bring no safety. Eventually, Genghis Khan himself intervened. He ordered the river to be diverted, a feat of terrifying ambition. Once the defenses were breached, the city fell. And when it did, the destruction was complete. The Mongols made sure Urgench could never rise again. They rerouted the river to flood the ruins. By the end of 1221, the Khwarezmian Empire was no more. The end of a civilization. What made this campaign different from other conquests in history was its completeness. The Mongols didn't just defeat the Khwarezmians militarily, they erased them. Their cities, their libraries, their scholars, all destroyed. This wasn't occupation, it was obliteration. Entire populations vanished. Centers of culture and learning that had taken centuries to build were gone in weeks. The Silk Road, once buzzing with life through Khwarezmian lands, was now a trail of ash and skulls. The Persian historian Juvaini, writing after the fact, called it one of the most horrifying tragedies ever witnessed. And yet, almost everything we know about the Khwarezmians today comes from the records of their destroyers. Their own voices were silenced. Aftermath and echoes. The consequences were staggering. The Islamic world was left reeling. The Khwarezmian Empire had been a beacon of learning and progress, a bridge between East and West. Its fall wasn't just a political loss, it was a cultural catastrophe. Manuscripts that had survived centuries were burned in days. Scholars who might have shaped future generations were killed or enslaved. Intellectual traditions were cut short. The demographic impact was equally profound. Though exact numbers are hard to verify, Some accounts claim the region lost up to 90% of its population. Cities became ghost towns. Irrigation systems collapsed. Farmland reverted to wilderness. And yet, the Mongols didn't destroy trade. Quite the opposite. They rebuilt the Silk Road, under their control. In time, the very empire that had burned Khwarezmian markets would become a commercial superpower, connecting China to Europe. It's one of history's great paradoxes. The same force that wiped out a civilization would later revive the trade routes that made it rich. The new definition of war, but perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Khwarezmian campaign, was what it revealed about the future of warfare. Genghis Khan didn't just win battles, he changed the rules. He showed that war wasn't just about territory or tribute. It could be about total annihilation, total war. No quarter, no rebuilding. Just the complete removal of an enemy's ability to exist. It was a warning that echoed through centuries. No empire, no matter how rich or refined, is safe from extinction if it underestimates its enemies. A monument of silence. By 1221, the great Khwarezmian cities, Merv, Samarkand, Bukhara, Nishapur, were ruins. Their streets were quiet, their people gone, their culture reduced to memory. The empire that had once challenged the Caliph, that had called itself the heir of Alexander the Great, had been reduced to dust in less than 3 years. Not because it was weak, but because its leaders were arrogant, because they mistook pride for power and diplomacy for dominance. Sultan Muhammad II made a choice. He killed envoys. He insulted a man who could have been an ally. He awakened something he could not understand, and it cost his people everything. The final lesson: there's something deeply unsettling about how fast it all happened. Centuries of progress, libraries, cities, dynasties gone in a heartbeat, all because of a few fatal decisions, a few moments of pride. The ruins of Merv and Samarkand, of Bukhara and Urgench, still whisper that warning. Civilization is fragile, power is temporary, and history is full of empires that believed themselves invincible, right up until the moment they vanished. The Khwarezmian Empire did not fall because it was weak. It fell because